It began the night she came to my door, rain-soaked, trembling. Wearing the same perfume he'd once said smelled like the kind of woman who forgives too easily. Her name was Alina Cross. And she was the wife of the man I'd loved for 3 years without knowing he had one. I remember how her mascara bled down her face as she said, "I think we've both been living in his shadow." That was the first time I saw what revenge could look like, 2 women sharing a cigarette. Instead of a secret, I told her everything. The hotel rooms, the weekends, the soft lies about needing space. She listened, silent except for the sound of her ring scraping the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "He told me I was paranoid. Turns out I was just early." We met again a week later at a cafe in Haverly, a quiet town 2 hours north where no one knew us. She brought documents, bank transfers, and screenshots. I brought calmness that felt foreign, almost surgical. "If we do this," I said, "it has to look like forgiveness." She smiled faintly. "Forgiveness is the prettiest mask." The plan wasn't dramatic. We didn't ruin his career or set his car on fire. We did something worse, we made him irrelevant. She withdrew from their shared company, quietly rerouting clients through a new firm under her name. I sold every trace of him from my life, deleted, blocked, ghosted. But together, we built something subtle and cruel, a silence he couldn't enter. Months passed. He called, begged, then raged. We didn't answer. His voice went from confident to desperate, from demanding to lost. One night, Alina called me from the porch of her new apartment. "He's finally gone," she said. "Took a job in another state. Left the city." I heard the clink of a wine glass, the faint echo of traffic below. "Do you feel free?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough to feel like truth forming. "No," she said. "But I feel clean." We met once more, years later. By accident, 2 strangers crossing at a bookstore. She had shorter hair, a softer smile. We didn't speak, only exchanged that brief, knowing look between women who'd burned the same ghost. Outside, it began to rain again, the kind of quiet rain that hides tears and memories alike. And as I walked away, I realized revenge had never been about him at all, it had always been about her and me, finding a way to exist without needing his name to define our ruin. And that's when silence became the loudest revenge. It started with a photograph, one I wasn't meant to see. His hand on her back, casual, familiar. Like a gesture he'd repeated 1,000 times when it was me. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I just folded the picture, slid it into my coat pocket, and waited for the right season to end something quietly. His wife's name was Naomi Dellon. I knew her from the edges of his stories. "She's fragile," he'd say, "I stay for her health." That was the kind of lie that softens the blade of guilt. But when I finally met Naomi, I realized she wasn't fragile. She was deliberate. She knew everything. She invited me to her home one Sunday under the pretense of charity work. Her eyes were calm, precise. "You're the one he calls when he's lonely," she said. I didn't answer. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was arithmetic. We both understood what needed balancing. Over tea, she asked, "Do you love him?" I said, "I used to." She smiled like someone solving a riddle. "Then let's make him irrelevant." What followed wasn't violence or scandal. It was erosion. We stopped reacting to him. She stopped cooking his favorite meals. I stopped replying to his late-night messages. We became 2 ghosts haunting the same man in daylight. His confidence started to splinter, first in meetings, then in mirrors. He looked for drama and found emptiness instead. One evening, Naomi sent me a text, "He's unraveling. Do you ever feel sorry?" I replied, "Sometimes. But not enough to stop." Months later, he moved out without ceremony, left a note that said, "I can't fix what I can't find." Naomi framed it and hung it in her kitchen, a private joke. Between survivors. Years passed. We never became friends, but we shared something deeper, a conspiracy of calm. The last time I saw her was at an art gallery opening. She was wearing black, holding a glass of white wine, looking at a painting of a storm frozen mid-motion. She turned to me and said, "Funny how peace can look like destruction if you freeze it at the right moment." I nodded, because she was right. Revenge had never been about breaking him, it was about teaching ourselves how to stop orbiting his gravity. As I left the gallery, I caught my reflection in the glass and thought, some ruins are more beautiful when left standing. They said she was the kind of woman men married out of guilt. Grace Holloway, his wife, his alibi, his first mistake. I met her on a Tuesday at a charity auction where she stood beside him, smiling like someone performing forgiveness. He introduced us carelessly, not knowing that introductions are how wars begin. "My wife, Grace." "Grace, this is Lila." Her handshake was light, almost curious. I think she knew before I did that something in me had already begun to change shape. For months, I watched her from a distance, the way she folded napkins, adjusted her ring, called him by his full name like a prayer she was trying to remember. I told myself I wasn't cruel. But cruelty, I learned, is simply patience in disguise. It took a year to dismantle his life. Not through scandal, not through exposure, but through imitation. I became her reflection. The perfume she wore, the way she held a glass, the tone she used when she said his name. Slowly, he stopped being able to tell where she ended and I began. When he came to me one night, drunk and desperate, he whispered, "I can't stand how much she reminds me of you." That's when I knew the revenge had worked. He couldn't love either of us without confusing the other. Grace never confronted me. She didn't have to. Instead, she sent a bouquet of white chrysanthemums to my apartment with a note that read, "He sleeps with your ghost now." That should be enough. For a while, it was. But silence is a strange addiction, it keeps asking for a witness. I ran into her years later at a train station. She looked lighter, freer. I asked if she ever missed him. She laughed softly. "Miss him? No. I miss who I pretended to be when I thought I loved him." The train arrived, a rush of wind scattering the petals from the flowers I was holding. She stepped aboard without looking back. I stood there, watching the empty platform, realizing that revenge had a cruel symmetry. It didn't end when he suffered. It ended when we both walked away, carrying only the versions of ourselves he'd ruined. And in that echo of departure, I finally understood. The most merciful punishment is forgetting someone so completely they start to remember you in nightmares. It began with a letter that wasn't meant for me, no address, no return name. Just the soft indentation of his handwriting pressing through the paper like a confession, trying to hide itself. Her name was Elise Navarro, and she was his wife. My name doesn't matter, women like me rarely get remembered. Only whispered about in rooms where forgiveness pretends to be virtue. I should have thrown that letter away. Instead, I read it again and again until every word became an instruction. She wrote, "If you ever find out who you are to him, I want you to know, I forgive you. Forgive me." The arrogance in that burned deeper than any insult. So I found her. She owned a small flower shop near the pier, the kind that smelled of salt and decay. Like something beautiful trying to survive in a place that didn't want it. I went there as a customer, bought lilies, then roses, then orchids. She smiled every time, never knowing I was buying back the scent of my own betrayal. Weeks passed. We talked about nothing and everything. Her kindness was precise, almost weaponized. I began to see what he loved about her, the quietness that made other people confess. Then one evening, when the fog rolled in thick enough to make the world smaller, I told her. I told her everything. She didn't cry. She didn't slap me. She just looked at me and said, "So he lied to both of us." That night we burned his letters behind her shop, watching the smoke rise like something holy and ruined. After that, we stopped speaking. But I knew she understood. Revenge wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about removal. Making him vanish without touching him. Months later, he called. Said she'd left him. Said the house felt haunted, that he kept smelling smoke. I told him maybe it was just the past catching up to him. He never called again. A year later, I saw Elise on the boardwalk. She was alone, her hair shorter, her hands stained faintly with ash. She didn't look at me, but when she passed, the wind carried a trace of burnt flowers. And for the first time, I realized forgiveness was the cruelest form of revenge. It began in a motel where the wallpaper peeled like old secrets. And the air smelled faintly of bleach and betrayal. He had told me he was separated. He always said it like a promise, never a fact. But then I saw her, his wife, standing at the reception desk one afternoon, asking for a key with the kind of calm that only comes from devastation already accepted. Her name was Serena Vale. I should have left then. Instead, I followed her into her silence. Weeks later, she called me. "I know who you are," she said. "But I don't think you know who he is." We met at a diner on the outskirts of town. She wore no makeup, no ring, just the kind of exhaustion that doesn't fade with sleep. "He lies to both of us," she said. "But I think we could make him tell the truth, for once." And that's how it began. Not an alliance. Not forgiveness. Just two women sharpening each other into something precise. She stayed home, played the wife's role perfectly. Dinners, smiles, patience. I did the opposite, stopped answering his calls, left traces where she could find them. Receipts. Lipstick. Notes folded into his jacket pocket. Every lie he'd told began to echo back at him, distorted and multiplied. Within a month, he started unraveling. Forgetting meetings, losing clients. Pacing the house at 3 a.m. Serena would call me just to say, "He's breaking." I'd answer, "Good, let him." But one night she didn't call. Instead, she sent a single photo, him asleep on the couch, surrounded by packed boxes. Underneath it, one line, "He's leaving tomorrow. He thinks it's his idea." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Months passed. I heard he'd moved across the country, started over. But the story didn't end with him, it ended the day Serena came to my apartment. Left an envelope under my door. Inside was a key to the motel room where it all began and a note, "You can keep the ghosts if you want. I'm done with them." I went there that night. The room was empty except for the faint imprint of two women who had burned down a man's certainty together. I stood by the window, smelled the bleach, the rain, the memory. And I realized revenge wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a ritual of erasure. And we had both learned how to disappear beautifully.